The Colorado Plateau, the vast and scenic red rock region of the American West. Through this land, the Colorado River, over millions of years, has cut canyon after canyon on the river's long journey toward the sea. One of the most colorful is named Glen Canyon, a twisting gorge in the earth-toned rocks of southern Utah and northern Arizona. To the south of Glen Canyon lies Navajo Indian country, where these industrious people reside in a colorful but harsh land of sand, towering buttes, narrow canyons, and lofty mesas. North of the river, several more precipitous side canyons also slice into the sandstone, where the landscape features polished domes and sheer high cliffs. Before 1956, most exploring parties into this remote region, on either side of the river, journeyed by way of a few rough dirt roads, or they traveled by even more adventurous means. Much of the importance of Glen Canyon as a site for a large dam can be attributed to the geography of the Colorado River Basin. The Colorado River carries mostly snowmelt from the tops of the Rocky Mountains, combining the flows of small rivulets and brooks, the flows of tumbling, clear mountain streams, the flows of larger rivers that carry the mountain water between hills, plateaus, and on into the desert. Water from 108,000 square miles, and it all reaches Glen Canyon. But the Colorado often behaves like an erratic outlaw, responding not to the whims of mankind, but rather to the mysteries of ocean currents, to the paths of yearly jet streams, and to the rushing winds over lofty mountains, bringing snow to the high country. The river flows from the Rocky Mountains downward through the driest corner of America, where water is a scarce and precious resource. Historically, the spring runoff often delivered too much water, more than cities and farms could handle, and sometimes causing extensive damage along its winding path, while in late summer and fall, the river flow dwindled to a small stream. The need was great for a dam and a large reservoir, both for storage and for flood control, and, incidentally, for production of hydroelectric power. In the early 1920s, Glen Canyon was investigated as a possible dam site, but was rejected in favor of building Hoover Dam, which was closer to the major power markets of Southern California.
Utilization of the Colorado River waters occurred first really in California. That is, utilization to any extent. They were able to divert water out of the Colorado and take it over into some of those desert areas like the Imperial Valley and develop those in a remarkable fashion for irrigation purposes. And there was a concern that Utah, Wyoming, Colorado, New Mexico would not be able to use its water, and it would all end up with California mostly, and perhaps Arizona, unless they did something to arrive at an agreement to divide the waters. There would be some recognition by those who were using the water in the south that there was an obligation to recognize an entitlement upstream. And it was thought that they should formalize that they should have an agreement between the 7 basin states. And there was a series of negotiations to achieve that end, and finally in 1922 they did arrive at an agreement known as the Colorado River Compact, and that divided the waters between the lower and the upper basin.
Well, the 1922 compact essentially split the Colorado River. The Colorado River produces maybe 15 million acre-feet of water on the long-term average. And that compact basically said the lower basin could have 7.5 million acre-feet of water, and the upper basin could have 7.5 million acre-feet of water. In addition to that, the upper basin agreed to guarantee its delivery of the 7.5 million to the lower basin. The guarantee that the upper basin gave to the lower basin has a tremendous underpinning for the purpose of Glen Canyon Dam. Colorado River, of course, is a typical western stream. The water that's in it is pretty much as a result of winter snowpack in the high reaches of the river basin, and very, very volatile in terms of the water supply. We're in a desert environment in the Colorado River. It's a desert river, and consequently very, very changeable in terms of its annual runoff. And so the upper basin is unique and different than the lower basin. Our storage is at the end of our system. And so we use the water, keep it out of the river, let what we can't use get into the river, store it at Lake Powell, and then use it like you would a bank account to take water out of during the periods of time when it's dry and there's not enough water. If we didn't do that, the law would require that we quit using water in the upper basin until there was enough water in the river that the obligations and commitments to the lower basin states were made. That's simply the purpose of Lake Powell.
After World War II, at the request of water users and political leaders, engineers and geologists again examined the lower end of Glen Canyon as a site for a possible dam. The need for a large reservoir was found to be met by the 186-mile stretch of Glen Canyon on the Colorado River, plus a 71-mile section of the San Juan River. As a site for a reservoir, it would hold a vast amount of water. Two additional factors governed where the dam would be located. First was the need for a good foundation that could safely hold a dam weighing 10 million tons.
You design for it. You plan for it. You take what you've got, even though it's earth or concrete, and you make it what it should be, regardless of what. Now, as far as the sandstone goes, well, sure, I prefer a granite foundation, but I would not turn down a sandstone foundation. And this one here, I think, is as competent as any foundation if it's treated right. I have all the faith in the world.
Second, but not less important, was a vital need to have a close source of quality sand, gravel, and rock, what the engineers call aggregate, to mix with the cemented water to make concrete. Planning engineers found substantial amounts of rounded, stream-worn, hard rock aggregate in the bed of Waweep Creek, only about 6 miles from the dam site. The metamorphosis of Glen Canyon, the construction of the Great Dam, the forming of Lake Powell, and eventually the transformation of a huge region of the American West began on a quiet summer morning in 1956. Surveyors and engineers from the Bureau of Reclamation arrived to map the topography of the dam site. Wasting no time, engineers were already at work, planning technical details of the future dam and writing specifications. The accelerated schedule called for construction to begin in October 1956. Due to the lack of roads, with some difficulty, dignitaries arrived on October 15th for the first ceremonial blast on the canyon wall. In Washington, D.C., President Dwight Eisenhower prepared to push a button to signal the start of construction of Glen Canyon Dam. With the detonation of the first blast, high scalers quickly moved in to remove loose rock from the canyon walls. High scalers also drilled holes in the rock for explosives to help remove overhanging rocks. Even though work had begun, the dam site lay surrounded by a desert of sand, cliffs, and canyons. The nearest existing highways were many miles away and were reachable only over rough dirt roads. New highways were built in record time across the rugged land, both from the north and from the south. These new completed highways reached out toward each of the canyon rims, new highways facing each other across a 1,200-foot wide chasm. Still, the driving distance from one rim to the other was over 200 miles. Until a real highway bridge could be constructed, at least a couple of years in the future, the contractor needed a footbridge across the canyon. It was to be a suspension bridge, but the floor and sidewalls were to be constructed of chain link fencing.
I had a love for that walk bridge. They've had some great stories on there. Somebody drove a Volkswagen out on it, and a lot of people get out there and they'd freeze, and they'd have to help them back. So, because it would just mesh wire and across some channel iron and cables hanging down, but it's a way to get from the west over to the west side where the barracks were. And
this bridge proved to be a popular and fast way to cross the canyon. It was extensively used until the dam was completed in 1964 when the contractor removed it. The footbridge was indeed breathtaking, but the long-term answer was a highway bridge, a spectacular steel arch bridge that would be the highest of its type in the world. Glen Canyon Bridge was designed as a vital part of the Glen Canyon project, and by 1957, construction of the bridge was well underway. On a warm summer morning in 1958, an American flag was placed on the last steel beam. When this last beam was pinned into position, the arch stood alone. In the next few months, steel columns were added. Concrete was placed for a roadway, and the bridge was finished, the highest steel arch bridge in the world. Governors from Utah and Arizona were on hand to cut the chain opening the new bridge to traffic. Some 865 feet upstream from the bridge, work continued on shaping the canyon to fit the dam. Diversion tunnels were needed to channel the flow of the river around the dam site. To be 41 feet in diameter, lined with 3 feet of concrete, and with a tunnel on each side of the canyon. Coffer dams, generally built of excavated material from the tunnels, would divert the river into the tunnels. Diversion of the river would then allow workers and equipment to excavate the foundation down to solid bedrock. These tunnels were drilled in the late 1950s, about a decade before tunnel drilling machines, or moles, were invented. At Glen Canyon, traditional drilling jumbos were used. Month after month, the work on the tunnels continued until the winter of 1959, when the tunnels were ready and the orders were given, close the cofferdam and divert the river. As the gap narrowed, the angry water began to roar through the channel. Great boulders were smashed or rolled downstream. For 3 days, the fight continued. Finally, slowly, it was done. The river shifted into its new course through the cliffs of Glen Canyon. Even before the river was diverted, workers and heavy equipment moved in to cut the keyways, giant notches on each side of the canyon walls that would anchor the big concrete dam. Amid the massive excavation efforts underway, the drilling of the spillways seemed almost to be a footnote. Still, the spillways were very large, and the drilling and lining was a major task in itself. During the 1960s, practically everyone believed that the spillways would not be used for many decades, and then only for very short periods. No one then could have imagined that in just over 20 years, these spillways would save the dam and power plant from destruction, but would themselves almost be destroyed. But back in 1959, with the river diverted, work could then proceed on the bottom part of the foundation. While clearing away old river deposits, workers uncovered an ancient, eroded channel cut by the Colorado River thousands of years ago. The channel seemed to show that the earth is always changing, that the Colorado River of today is not the same river as in the distant past. Finally, firm bedrock was reached in the old river channel up to 137 feet below the average river surface. By June 1960, the dam site was ready for concrete. A large crowd assembled on Glen Canyon Bridge to watch the ceremonial placing of the first bucket of concrete. State governors and the Secretary of the Interior dumped the first concrete on the sandstone bedrock. To produce concrete in the massive quantities that would be required would involve many complex operations. The bulk of concrete is rock and sand, aggregate. From the bed of Wahweap Creek, raw aggregate was taken by conveyor belt to a large screening plant. Every hour, this plant could wash and screen 800 tons of aggregate. A fleet of large trucks, constantly making the 5-mile trip, convey the aggregate to the dam site. Bulk cement for the dam was produced by a new plant at Clarkdale, Arizona, 188 miles to the south. To convey 3 million barrels of cement to Glen Canyon Dam, a truck had to load and leave the plant every 40 minutes, day and night, for over 3 years. Just north of Flagstaff, another ingredient for concrete was dug from a large deposit of volcanic ash. When added to concrete, it was called pozzolan. Pozzolan is used to give concrete desirable qualities, such as reducing the heat buildup in fresh concrete. But even with pozzolan, new concrete builds up chemical heat. This is called heat of hydration. In massive blocks, this heat must be dissipated to prevent the concrete from cracking. On a ledge of Glen Canyon, a large refrigeration plant was built to make ice for mixing with wet concrete. Giant compressors in this plant also chilled water to be pumped through embedded pipes in the dam to help cool the concrete. The flow of ingredients was all directed to a central plant, to a giant batch plant where the concrete was actually made. In this structure, as high as a 21-story building, concrete was produced at the rate of 8 cubic yards a minute.
REZ.
Still REZ. Right. Hey, what's another half a bucket down the river, Bob? Hold your travel.
They had at least 2 cableways pouring the concrete with those 12-yard buckets, and one would pass the other, and they had these trains where they'd dump in there, and the minute they'd dump that, these men like a bunch of bees would jump in there, and they had to vibrate that concrete just right. The government had enough inspectors down there that if you didn't do your work properly, even vibrating the concrete, you vibrate it too much, you separate all of that aggregate. And if you didn't vibrate it enough, there was an inspector there standing all the time watching. If you didn't like that, it would bother you. But if you liked to do a quality job and the inspector's patting you on the back, that great job, you know, and that helped build the unity. Go on, Highball.
Placing of concrete continued bucket by bucket, hour by hour, into the afternoon shadows and all through the night. In late afternoon, workers of the swing shift came on to work into the night. But for many, it was the hour to return to their homes and to their families. 2 miles from the dam, on a mesa top, a city was carved out of the desert to provide homes, schools, stores, and churches for the workers and their families. It was named Page to honor John C. Page, a former commissioner of the Bureau of Reclamation. The city was to serve first the people who built the dam. Later, it would provide homes for those who would operate the dam and administer the recreation on Lake Powell.
This was a very hot issue. You may not believe it, but it was. The building of the dam, the design of the dam, that was not a problem. But finding a place for people to live was the state of Arizona wanted, the state of Utah. Well, after we had walked all that afternoon there, we didn't find a thing that looked good. I'll tell you, it was discouraging. So, looked up here, saw that rim. We were way down, and I said, Louis was puffing. I said, let's go out and take a look, see what's up there. So we did. We walked up to the edge of this, up on this mesa here, and neither one of us said a word to each other. We just looked at it. And he was puffing his corncob pipe, and he looked at me and said, Lim, what's the matter with this? I said, not a thing. I said, not a thing.
Well, when we first moved to Page, and it seemed the wind was worse back in those early 60s. And my wife would spend so much time sucking the sand out of the windowsills, and it would blow not in the windowsills but over into the sink. In this trailer house we had, I tell you that I believe that sand went right through the aluminum siding.
During construction of the dam, the mobile home park in Page contained over 900 trailers.
And we'd even come down after work and bring my family down, and we'd stand on a bridge and nothing else to do. We'd watch the night shift. So it was fun.
Within the rising blocks of the dam, 8 large pipes called penstocks were embedded into the concrete. Through these penstocks, water was to flow under intense pressure to drive the turbines of the power plant. Descending through the dam, the penstocks emerged on a line toward the power plant and were linked by great steel sections weighing 100 tons each. Dam building became much more mechanized in the 25 years since Hoover Dam was built. Hoover Dam, built in the early 1930s, is about the same size as Glen Canyon, yet the construction of Hoover Dam required almost double the number of employees. Injuries and fatalities were also greatly reduced. At Hoover Dam during the early 1930s, over 100 men were killed. At Glen Canyon Dam, there were 18 fatalities.
There's one thing about a construction job, I've always found it. You cannot call a staff meeting to answer your daily problems. Before the sun goes down, somebody's got to say we go or we don't go. And this is something that's difficult for some people to do. And it was never for me if I had the background and the people. I always tried to surround myself with these kind of people.
The year 1961 came and passed, and the dam rose higher, 300 feet in 12 months. For over 2 years, while concrete was being placed in the dam, the structure of the power plant took shape. All 16-foot diameter penstocks were completed. The power of falling water would turn the turbines installed at the bottom of the power plant. Each spinning turbine would rotate a vertical shaft connected to a generator. hundreds of miles to the south, east, and north, heavy transmission lines were constructed to carry hydroelectric energy from Glen Canyon Power Plant to cities in several western states. On a cool January morning in 1963, one of the blocks reached crest elevation. To mark the occasion, the contractor, Merritt, Chapman, and Scott, placed a Christmas tree on this highest point. From that point on, it was only a few months to completion. 4 years of excavation and 3 years of concrete placement had elapsed, as one by one, the blocks reached crest elevation. On an early fall day, the last bucket of concrete was filled by the transfer car and was hoisted aloft, the last of over 400,000 buckets of concrete needed for the dam. To celebrate the occasion, project construction engineer Lem Wiley of the Bureau of Reclamation, who had worn one old hat all during construction, donated it to the dam. While concrete was still rising in the dam in January 1963, broken pieces of ice were drifting down the Colorado River and disappearing into the blackness of the Wright Diversion Tunnel. With the dam nearing full elevation, the decision was made to close one of the 2 diversion tunnels. Closing the Wright Tunnel quickly created a lake 34 feet deep. For 2 months, this small lake remained stable, while the river flowed freely through the higher left diversion tunnel. The left diversion tunnel, however, was only fully open until March 13, 1963, when the gate was partially closed. And on this day in March, Lake Powell began its 17-year-long rise into the long and winding Glen Canyon and into 100 twisting narrow side canyons. The lake was named Lake Powell in honor of Major John Wesley Powell, who had explored the Colorado River canyons in 1869 and who later strongly emphasized the need for cooperative water development in the western United States. Soon, the rising lake broke through the cofferdam and lapped against the dam itself. The quickly rising Lake Powell, with an eventual shoreline distance of almost 2,000 miles, soon provided a long, scenic water surface for boating and exploring. The National Park Service and its concessionaires were soon installing boat ramps, stores, motels, and campgrounds. While from national fish hatcheries, fish arrived, fish by the millions, dropped by fast-moving planes over remote stretches of the long lake. In September 1966, the dam was dedicated by the nation's First Lady, Lady Bird Johnson.
There are Alps in many places, and raging seacoasts and sandy deserts. But there is only one sculptured earth of painted canyons, and that is here on the Colorado Plateau. My hat is off to the men who figured the stresses and strains and who diverted the river during construction, and to all the rest of the dreamers and doers who brought this project live born into its rocky cradle.
And so the 1960s and the 1970s passed. Glen Canyon Dam and Power Plant operated generally as planned. Lake Powell filled in 1980, and practically everyone assumed it was an extremely rare event, unlikely to happen again for several decades. The spillway was tested and was found to have been slightly eroded by cavitation. It was understood that use of the spillway was certain to cause cavitation damage. Cavitation occurs when high velocity flows are thrown upward by some small obstruction. This causes a partial vacuum, producing vapor cavities in the water. These unstable cavities then collapse, sending intense shock waves against the concrete. At first small pieces, then larger pieces are literally pounded out. After one hole is formed, a leapfrog action tends to promote the start of another, on down the tunnel in stair-step fashion. It was realized, too, that most of the damage would probably occur at the elbow section where the spillway levels out. By the 1980s, Bureau of Reclamation engineers had come up with a new design for the type of spillway used at Glen Canyon. The new design incorporated what is called an air slot, a notch cut into a spillway that would introduce an air cushion into the rushing water and thus prevent cavitation.
Well, the air slots were designed to do about the same thing that happens on your kitchen tap when you screw one of those little aerators on the end of your tap. If you take it off and turn the water on, it hits the sink and splashes all over you. You put the aerator on, turn your sink on, and it hits the sink and just softly runs down the drain.
The cutting of the air slots into Glen Canyon spillways was scheduled for some time during the 1980s. Assuming average runoff down the Colorado River, a few years' delay in remodeling the spillways would have been no problem. Then nature intervened. Snowfall during the winter of 1982 and 1983 was only a little heavier than usual, but late spring storms quickly raised the snowpack to far above average. With the sudden heat of summer, the runoff turned into a flood down the Colorado and its tributaries. Lake Powell rose quickly and ominously toward the spillways of Glen Canyon Dam.
It became pretty apparent that just releasing water through the power plant would not be sufficient. We then turned on the 4 bypass tubes.
But it was not enough. The left spillway gates also had to be opened. Temporary plywood boards were attached to the top of the spillway gates to hold back some of the rising water. When the spill was raised to accommodate the huge inflow into the lake, large chunks of rock and concrete were hurled from the spillway. The flow was immediately reduced and the water cleared. By this time, however, the peak of the spring runoff, over 120,000 cubic feet per second, was flowing into Lake Powell. Much of this inflow would have to be sent through the spillways. It was a tense situation for the engineers in charge. No one could enter the left spillway, yet no one knew the extent of the damage.
The only way we can get additional storage is to add flashboards on top of the gates, tie them back down into the gate struts, and that will add additional storage in the reservoir.
Heavy steel flashboards, 8 feet high, were placed on the top of each gate. These would replace the smaller wooden boards and would reduce the need to spill water until Lake Powell stopped rising. A contractor began installing the boards on the 4th of July, working around the clock. Within 2 days, the big flashboards and the bracing were in place. The left spillway gates could then be temporarily halted for an inspection. 2 brave engineers then prepared for a descent on a winch-powered cart into the darkening, mysterious chasm. These men found cavitation holes so deep they could not proceed further. Gates of the spillway were again opened and the flow resumed. As expected, the rise of Lake Powell finally slowed, and by late August 1983, all spillway flows were shut down. It was found that cavitation had dug deep holes 8 to 10 feet deep and 25 feet wide. When the water was pumped out, the spillway disclosed an amazing array of rock rubble that had been gouged from the tunnel floor, including this huge boulder that had been lifted out by tons of falling water. Most astonishing of all was the big hole at the elbow section, found to be 32 feet deep, 40 feet wide, and 150 feet long. It took 2,500 cubic yards of concrete to fill the hole. Removing broken concrete and shaping the tunnel proceeded at full speed. While in the mountains, early snow was beginning to deepen, indicating that the spillways might be needed again in 1984. In the Denver Engineering Laboratory, engineers completed the precise design for the air slots to be incorporated in the upper part of the Glen Canyon spillways. Following their design, almost 3,500 drill holes were required for small explosive charges used to excavate the 4-foot deep air slots. The air slots were completed just before the onset of the spring runoff, but fortunately, the flashboards contained the rise in Lake Powell. In August 1984, a major test was run to see if the air slots were as effective as predicted. After the 5-day test, a team of inspectors entered the spillway tunnel. No cavitation damage could be detected. The design and installation of the air slots had been a complete success. Of course, the spillways will be used again, perhaps not for many years, but when the water again roars down them, the tunnels will be ready. Not so apparent were the changes caused by the steady flow of clear, cold water from the dam. Unlike the sudden and unexpected spillway crisis, a concern slowly grew over the years about the environmental effects of the water flowing from the dam and fluctuating to meet power demands. Before the dam was built, the Colorado River carried huge amounts of sediment and sand, especially during the spring runoff. But Lake Powell is capturing the sediment, and the water released from the dam is clear and cold. What had been a warm desert river had turned cold, similar to a rushing mountain river, and all of it flowing through the Grand Canyon. The fluctuating clear water eroded riverbanks, while the cold water itself was damaging to native fish species, such as the humpback chub. For over a decade, scientists carefully examined the changes in sandbars, vegetation, mammals, reptiles, fish life,
1 pound. Very bad.
birds, insects, and recreation.
Now, having done all of that, and using that information as a basis, we proceeded to draft an environmental impact statement, which came to some conclusions as to how we might better operate the dam in order to accommodate the various concerns and disciplines. And that's what we did. And as a result of that, and as a result of some prodding by the Congress, I should say, we altered the operation of the dam. We eliminated to a large degree, or at least cut back, the dramatic releases which caused the big surges to go down the river. We more evened out the flow so that those interests could be better accommodated. And I think we did a very good job in that regard.
That has impacted Glen Canyon is we no longer peak like we used to. In other words, we no longer drastically change our generation like we used to in the past. We are more a base-loaded or steady flow type system, and really the impacts of that is we still produce about the same amount of generation on an annual basis. We just don't peak our plant. We don't see the large releases out of Glen Canyon from hour to hour like you used to. Again, we have 70 employees associated with the operation and maintenance activities here at Glen Canyon Dam. Those folks are anywhere from the administrative type to engineers to electricians, mechanics, and power plant operators.
Well, what you're seeing here, this is a foundation tunnel. These are actually tunnels that were drilled back into the canyon wall. One of the things they use it for is monitoring of water seepage through this sandstone. The other thing they do is with this instrumentation right here, it actually measures the compression of the rock that the dam puts on it. So sandstone has some elasticity to it and everything, and as the lake was filling up behind it, it compressed the canyon walls, and this instrumentation here measures that compression on the rock.
This is the control center for the Colorado River Storage Project. From this control center here in the Glen Canyon Dam Power Plant, we operate the Glen Canyon Dam Power Plant, the Morrow Point, Blue Mesa Power Plant, Crystal Power Plant on the Gunnison River in Colorado, the Flaming Gorge Power Plant in northern Utah, and the Fontenelle Dam and Power Plant in Wyoming. Right now on the SCADA computer, the control center operator is monitoring a schedule telling him what his hourly power requirements are from the Glen Canyon Dam and the other remote plants that we operate.
The design of Glen Canyon Dam and its 10 years of construction were challenging achievements, as were the design and reconstruction of the spillways. From a distance, the dam may often appear deceptively quiet, as if nothing was happening. Yet within and around the dam are scenes of constant vigilance and maintenance activities. For the dam, the power plant, and associated features can almost be considered as a giant, dynamic, living creature, but a creature that never rests.